sí, valoramos la vida. Impulsando y fortaleciendo el desarrollo sostenible y la consolidación del movimiento cooperativo de producción, FECOPROD presenta Camino al Desarrollo, el programa oficial de la FECOPROD.
Hola queridos, queridas, ¿cómo están? Antes que nada, sean todos bienvenidos a una edición más de Camino al Desarrollo del programa de la FECOPROD, que como semana tras semana, martes tras martes, estamos transmitiendo la mejor energía, la mejor onda acá por las pantallas de la red chaqueña de comunicaciones. Hoy tenemos un programón. ¿Por qué? Porque no hice la entrevista. No, mentira. Pero en serio no hice la entrevista, hablando mal y pronto. Estuvimos nada más y nada menos con el doctor Fernando Griffith, ex viceministro de Educación, ex ministro de Cultura, una eminencia al ámbito pedagógico. Pero no estuvimos hablando con el doctor Fernando Griffith, sino que el doctor Fernando Griffith nos hizo el favor de encarar la entrevista con nada más y nada menos que con el científico doctor William Happer. El doctor Happer viene de nada más y nada menos que de la Universidad de Princeton, que es la universidad que en su momento le enseñó a grandes intelectuales como Albert Einstein, a Robert Oppenheimer, entre otros, ¿verdad? Y justamente el doctor Happer estuvo por Paraguay en las últimas semanas hablando sobre la materia relacionada a CO2, dióxido de carbono, una materia que a nivel internacional se está debatiendo mucho. Muchos culpan al dióxido de carbono sobre las consecuencias del cambio climático, pero hay un sector, entre ellos encabezado por el doctor Happer, que justamente dice que el CO2, muy al contrario de satanizarlo, hay que valorarlo porque también trae sus beneficios. Te quiero dejar ahora en la entrevista que realizó el doctor Fernando Griffith, porque modestia aparte, como cristiano que soy, tengo que ser sincero, I don't speak English, ¿verdad? No soy tan bueno en el inglés. El doctor Griffith es muy bueno, así que vamos a estar escuchando ahora la entrevista de la mano del doctor Fernando Griffith al doctor Happer. Quédate expectante.
Professor Happer, thank you for being here.
Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah. Can I ask you one question?
Yes?
Maybe a few more.
All right.
Why do you say that carbon dioxide is the gas of life?
Well, we're basically creatures that are built of carbon, and so all of life depends on carbon. You know, if you look at our own body tissue, it's made of amino acids, which are built on carbon atoms in the center of them, and they've got lots of carbon elsewhere. And so to call this molecule, which is the central part of life, a pollutant is just crazy. You know, I don't know how they've managed to get away with this. And of course we breathe out huge amounts of carbon every day. Every human being breathes out perhaps 900 grams of carbon. In English units, it's about 2 pounds a day. It's a lot of carbon.
Yeah.
And it's very good for the world. The plants are greedy to have more carbon dioxide.
Is it true that the world is greener? It's becoming greener because of...
The world is definitely greening from more carbon dioxide. And if you look at the geological record of carbon dioxide from proxies and the sediments, the levels today are unusually low. They're not nearly the levels that plants would prefer. Plants would like 3 or 4 times as much carbon dioxide in the air as we have today.
So what about climate change? Is that real? Are we facing...
Of course, yeah. Climate is always changing.
Yeah, that's right.
And it's been changing the last 200 years. The Earth has been warming. But it's important to notice that the warming actually began in the year 1800, long before there was any increase in CO2.
And was not the only time where actually the Earth was much hotter, right?
The Earth has been much hotter many times in the past. You know, in my...
So why is it that people is so concerned about climate change?
It's a combination of many motives. Many people are simply ignorant and they've been brainwashed by the media. In fact, many people in the media probably believe what they're saying because they have no scientific training and they're told that this is the truth and they believe it.
So it's more about politics than science?
I think definitely much more about politics than science, yes. In fact, I would even say, I'm only half joking when I say that this movement is some funny combination of a religious cult and organized crime, because many people are making lots of money from it.
I've been to one of your conferences here in Paraguay, and I was surprised about one of the graphs you show, the one of energy being released to the atmosphere versus the wavelengths of...
Right.
And could you explain that graph, please? At least what will happen if the amount of carbon dioxide is doubled? From 400 to 800 parts per million.
Well, that's a good question. So let's take just a few minutes and talk about the theory of greenhouse warming. So there really are greenhouse gases in our atmosphere. So I'm looking out the window behind you and I can see clouds, for example, and clouds are very powerful greenhouse mechanism, but so is water vapor, so is CO2. So the way Earth's temperature is defined is sunlight comes down and warms the surface during the daytime. And if there were no way to get rid of that sunlight, that heat from the sun, the Earth would get hotter and hotter and it would soon be fatal for everyone.
Yeah.
But that doesn't happen because at the same time the sunlight is coming down, infrared radiation is going out into space, so the Earth glows in the dark. So if you and I had infrared eyes,
we'd be able
like
to see
snakes,
it,
for example, we could look at the Earth and we would see the Earth is glowing in the dark, day and night. And we have satellites that do that, actually. And so the temperature that we live in is the balance between sunlight coming in, radiation going out to space again,
That glow would be infrared.
That's infrared radiation. And that flow of cooling radiation back to space is impeded a little bit by CO2. So if you took all the CO2 away, you would get much faster flow of radiation. If you get more CO2, it goes a little more slowly. So the story, the narrative is that CO2 is such a potent retarder of the cooling radiation that if you increase it even a little bit, it will cause runaway warming of the Earth. But that's not true at all. You can double CO2 and it only decreases radiation to space by 1%.
Right, so that's very important. So every single empirical evidence shows the same. If we double the amount of carbon dioxide, the only contribution will be 1% more.
That's right, and even the IPCC admits that, but they don't advertise it.
Right, yes.
Estamos presentando Camino al Desarrollo, el programa oficial de la FECOPROD. RCC Radio Asunción 1250 AM, comprometidos con la verdad. Somos parte del holding de medios RCC. Estación de servicio Kleefeld, donde es un placer atenderlo. Venta de combustible, lubricantes varios, gas GLP y todo tipo de productos para el área automotriz, ofreciendo también la distribución de gasoil en todo el Chaco paraguayo. Además, Estación de Servicio Kleefeld te ofrece una gran variedad de alimentos de la canasta familiar, carnes, embutidos frescos y más. Visítanos en Avenida Trébol, entre Carlos Casado y Palo Blanco, de lunes a sábados de 6 a 19 horas. Estación de Servicio Kleefeld. Estamos para servirle. Cooperativa Fernheim.
El campo produce, Paraguay crece. Nació gracias al trabajo de miles de productores que trabajan día tras día antes de amanecer y luego de oscurecer para llevar alimento a la mesa de cada familia paraguaya. Gracias a las personas capaces de transformar la tierra de hoy en frutos de mañana. Avancemos con esfuerzo y unidad en el Paraguay del progreso. Aquel que cuando produce, crece. El campo produce, Paraguay crece. Es una iniciativa apoyada por FECOPROD y Concopar.
Hace una década comenzamos a escribir nuestra historia y la de cientos de clientes que con sus sueños desafiaron nuestros propios límites. Hasta que un día el mundo se detuvo. Y tuvimos que reinventarnos para crear nuevas oportunidades para nuestros colaboradores, clientes y para el país. Porque al final todos estamos conectados. Bancop, 10 años sin parar para que vos no pares.
con más de Camino al Desarrollo, el programa oficial de la FECOPROD.
Okay, so is there any chance, I mean, how long will take for humanity to double CO2 according to the...
Well, that's a good question. For example, CO2 levels today are around 400 parts per million, maybe 430 and CO2 is increasing at about 2.5 parts per million per year. So if you divide 400 by 2.5, that's over 100 years.
Wow.
You know, it's not quite 200 years, but it's a long time.
It's a long time. And
Yeah.
so what about the net zero narrative? I mean, the carbon footprint and the fact that these people say that we have to get the net zero emissions. I mean, you know what I mean?
Yes, I know what you mean, and it is,
Is it
complete. It's insanity because
But-
every effect of CO2 is actually beneficial to life on Earth. You know, you can see the whole Earth getting greener from more CO2, and especially in regions with limited rainfall, like Western Paraguay, you know.
So net zero emissions would be no life, no production. Am I right?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay.
No, it's insane. And yet, many people believe it, and they feel very virtuous about trying to reach this goal.
Correct me if I am wrong. I think you were one of the first scientists who ever published something about carbon dioxide contribution on Earth, on climate. Am I right?
Well, I'm certainly not the first. The first one to really study this was back in 1850, 1860. John Tyndall, an Irish scientist, and he was the first one to recognize that carbon dioxide and water vapor are greenhouse gases. And he did wonderful experiments. They were very good. Even today we can still use them. But he was an experimentalist, and the first scientist to try to calculate the effect quantitatively was the Swedish chemist Arrhenius. And so Arrhenius was the first to recognize that it was hard to make much difference by adding CO2. He was the first to recognize that there was a logarithmic relationship between concentration of CO2 and warming.
So I have read something about, when you Google it, you see people saying, there is a scientific consensus on this, that climate change is actually real, and not only that, it's man-made.
Yes.
May I ask you something, Dr. Happer? Is science about consensus?
Science is certainly not about consensus, as you know very well, being a scientist yourself. Scientist is about making a hypothesis, making a theory, and then you compare the predictions of the theory to what you observe.
Yeah, and sometimes you destroy your own hypothesis.
That's correct.
And it's fine. I mean,
That is what you're supposed to do, and so you should always be questioning.
Right.
And anyone who says science is settled doesn't understand what science is, you know, or anyone who says scientific consensus has determined this is completely nonsense, because truth is determined by comparison with what you observe in the real world.
yeah. Tell me again the tale about Albert Einstein saying that when 100 scientists wrote against his theory, and he finally says something.
Yes.
That was so funny.
Many scientists in the 1920s and 1930s didn't understand Einstein's relativity theory, and they thought it was clearly wrong. It was against common sense. So some enterprising publisher had a book written with 100 papers, you know, attacking Einstein's theories. And so when this was published, and a news reporter asked Einstein, "What do you think about this?" Einstein says, "I don't know why they needed 100. One would have been enough if he was correct."
It was so funny, by the way.
Yeah, that's the way science is. You don't need a consensus. You need one clear experiment.
Dr. Happer, why we say that, what is the scientific ground of saying that CO2 is actually beneficial for plants growing? Why do plants grow faster or better or bigger or stronger when we have more CO2 on air?
Right. Well, plants are little factories that manufacture organic molecules with carbon in them. And the fundamental process is the plant uses energy from the sun to make ATP, things you know very well. And then it uses this energy with enzymes to take a molecule of water vapor and a molecule of carbon dioxide and stick them together and pop off oxygen. And that newly formed molecule then is attached to sugar, so that produces sugar. And so the fundamental raw material for the biochemical factory in a plant is carbon dioxide and water. Those are the two most important.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Professor Happer, you are a professor, emeritus professor of Princeton University, right?
That's correct, yes.
Correct me if I'm wrong. That's Einstein's department and university.
Well, yes, Einstein spent the last half of his life at Princeton. He was actually at the Institute for Advanced
and
Study.
also Oppenheimer.
Oppenheimer, yes.
Have you met Oppenheimer?
I knew Oppenheimer. Einstein, alas, had died before I came to Princeton.
So, Mr. Happer, this is me speaking. This is science,
Yeah.
true science. Thank you for for coming to Paraguay. We feel so honored to be here, and we hope we can see you again, coming again to Paraguay, because we really like the way you present facts. So thank you again.
Well, thank you, Dr. Griffith. I've enjoyed my trip very much, and I really admire the people of Paraguay.
Thank you so much.
Bueno, queridos, esas fueron las palabras del doctor Happer con nada más y nada menos que el ex viceministro de Educación, el doctor Fernando Griffith. Dos eminencias del ámbito educativo que vienen a confrontar al establishment global. Y cuando hablo del establishment global, hablo del establishment que de alguna manera impulsa la idea de cobrar impuestazos a un país en desarrollo como Paraguay, siendo que Europa y otros países fundieron literalmente su campo, y Paraguay hoy, según Naciones Unidas, es nada más y nada menos que el segundo país más verde de la región. Pero sin embargo, hay una agenda que de alguna manera busca satanizar a nuestro país y también a nuestro sector productivo, que sin lugar a dudas es el motor de la economía. Como siempre decimos en la FECOPROD, cuando el campo produce, el Paraguay crece. Hay gente que le molesta que el Paraguay crezca y que el campo produzca. Por eso que tenemos que estar expectantes a estos puntos que son sin lugar a dudas importantes en el debate político y geopolítico a nivel internacional. Ojo a estos puntos. Nos están atacando, tenemos que defendernos, y la única manera de defendernos es prepararnos intelectualmente para dar la buena batalla. Por nuestro lado, esto fue todo. Que Dios les bendiga. Nos encontramos el próximo martes. Fuerte abrazo para todos.
Impulsando y fortaleciendo el desarrollo sostenible y la consolidación del movimiento cooperativo de producción, FECOPROD presenta Camino al Desarrollo, el programa oficial de la FECOPROD.